is to get Mr. Flynn, our administration, to give us updates regarding what the state says and what we are going to be doing as we move forward. For starters, I just want to share that currently under is to get Mr. Flynn, our administration, to give us updates regarding what the state says and what we are going to do. And I'm getting some kind of a feedback. Is it me or?
Yes, you are, Ernie.
So what do I do?
You sound fine now, Ernie.
Oh, so what was heard? I don't even know what was heard. But anyway.
I heard everything that you were saying, but
I did not.
Okay. Bottom line, we set up the meeting so we can have Mr. Flynn available to answer questions when it comes to going back to work. And hopefully he can answer some of the summer school questions that obviously are here. But come September, we all don't know what's going to happen. I believe the first week in August is when the governor is going to announce what the decisions are. We don't know. I know that they have been getting reports from the state as to what they're going to do, but that is something that Mr. Flynn will have to answer. It's not that we're bowing out of giving answers, but we don't know. Most of the information is shared directly with administration. We learn a lot coming from them. In the interim, as we await Mr. Flynn getting here, please, we'll open this to answer questions that you may have right now. Jen?
I'm here.
I don't know if there are questions that we can answer in the interim with concerns that members have.
You can type in the chat box. I don't see anybody in typing. Any questions?
This is too easy.
Okay, does nobody really want to ask a question, or is it that, because I have 700 questions.
Well, please start. Please.
One of the questions that I have, all right, let's assume that we do have to go back to work and everything is required that we go back to work. How are we assuring that our members are in equitable situations, whether it be their classroom setting or their risk factor setting? How are we addressing that? Are we addressing it now, or are we waiting to find our guidelines before we address any of that?
I can answer that one. About a half hour ago, I was meeting with the executive board, and one of the concerns were specific groups, and we kind of talked about members that are in like the related services. Very unique in terms of how they, they disseminate, their education, and it's very complex. There are no solid guidelines yet. When it comes to a classroom teacher, I believe, and again, we could be wrong, but it's just Ernie Lewis saying this. This has no validity. I believe that we can better adjust it.
I disagree 100%.
Okay.
And I say that in all due respect, but I disagree 100% in that factor. Everyone and that I know in the junior, senior high school is completely next to their student for sometimes full prompting on a regular basis. There are some classrooms that in order for those students to function, you are doing some level of close interaction all the time. Some classrooms are so small that there's no way that 6-foot distancing, unless you only had one student in the classroom and yourself, would be the only way that environment could occur. There are some classrooms that don't have sinks. So the fact that you cannot have a static environment and you have to go to the public bathroom to wash your hands for whatever needs you have, that's a factor. So I don't think it's just the service people who service, and I agree that they do service in a very clear, touching way. PT is touching, but likewise, teachers are 90% of their day in some way interacting with students, whether it be by holding their pencil, touching them, holding their hand to remind them how to follow them in the hall, wherever they're going. Some teachers are bathrooming students. Regularly, I bathroom students and have through my whole career. So I don't think it's unique to just service people. So I want to just say that because I've heard over our last couple of meetings that service people have a unique situation. And I just want to bring to the point that although a teacher and I could be wrong, a teacher in Brennan's environment might be different than a teacher in junior, senior. Elementary probably has more hands-on than junior, senior, but there are many teachers in our program that will be just as hands-on as service people. So that's my point.
Okay, and I will fully agree with you, and only to the point that, yes, you have more closeness with your students. However, it is a lot more flexible for the agency to be able to disperse you, whereas it's not that simple for related services. That's what I was trying to convey.
Well,
You know
what do you mean by that,
Ernie? Can I just jump in for a second? I think, Teresa, I think you bring up great points. I think there's lots of concerns here. I do, however, think that Mr. Flynn has joined the meeting. So maybe we can, let him address the group and kind of take it from there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Devin, for that. And good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to your Zoom meeting. And the purpose of today's conversation is to provide the group with updated information in terms of reopening plans, and also to answer any questions that you might have. Happy to do that. So let's start off with health and safety. It's paramount. It's number one in everyone's list of concerns. And it's number one on my list of concerns. The New York State Board of Regents, when they conducted their listening tour in June to gather information from the stakeholders throughout the state about what should the reopening look like, they listed number one, their goal is health and safety. Having said that, I cannot guarantee that people will not get sick, period. I can't, I won't. What I can tell you is that I am and I will continue to give health and safety of students and staff our highest priority. I can tell you that spoke with the parents about my decision to not open up the summer school. I don't speak for other districts. I know there were other BOCES and districts that provided in-person extended school year services to their special ed students. And I don't speak for them. I'll speak for this agency. We were not prepared. And that was my recommendation to the board. There were just too many questions I had. Listening in about making sure that staff have personal protection And it's not just, you know, I heard the conversation that you were having before I started speaking. And yeah, you're going to have to wear gloves. And yeah, you're going to have to, I'm ordering even face shields because we have in our programs, particularly the junior, senior high school and elementary school, we have direct hand-on-hand contact. You know, in reading through the guidance, which I do every day, you can't even wear a face shield solely. You have to wear it along with a face mask. But you know, your heart goes out to parents when they talk to you about the regression that's occurred with their child who hasn't been in school. It's a terrible conversation to have. And I'll tell you what I told them. I can't bring your child back to school until I can do my very best to ensure your child's health and safety and that of the staff. And that's where I stand. And I'll continue to have that position going forward. So I'm gonna go into the weeds a little bit today and share where we are. But before doing that, there was actually there was a memo that Dr. Giganti, who is our personnel administrator, sent out. So I think he sent it out today. But it has to do with one of the governor's executive orders on travel advisories. I'm sure you listen to this on the news every night, that there are states that are now experiencing what the Northeast experienced back in March and August. They have high spikes of infection of COVID-19. California who is part of the Northeast corridor back in March and April at having high rates of infection, thought they had it under control, and they're looking at a situation that infection rates are increasing, and they're looking to roll back some of the phases that were implemented over the past 2 months. So one of the requirements that Governor Cuomo issued was a travel advisory. And if any individual who lives in New York State travels to one of these designated hotspot states, that's the term they typically use, but hotspot means that these are states that are experiencing a high rate of COVID-19 infection. If you visit one of these states, when you return to New York, you will have to quarantine for 14 days. And the governor has used some pretty serious and strong language that's attached to that travel advisory, saying that people will be fined if they don't adhere to the quarantine. And they're taking information that was reported in the last couple of days at the airport, taking your name, contact information. So I can't tell you where to go and not to go. You know, you might have very compelling reasons to go to a state because someone in your family is ill, or you have to take your child to college or school, or, you know. So it's not for me to direct you. I have no business telling you where to go or where not to go. And I don't intend on doing that, but I do feel a responsibility. I'm not required to do it, but I feel a responsibility that if you're not aware of this, to make you aware of it. And the other part of the advisory, the executive order, was that the governor said that one of the initial executive orders had provided for New York State residents, if you had to quarantine, that there was a certain amount of paid leave that the employer would provide. So what the governor said in this latest executive order, if you voluntarily travel to one of these hotspot states, you will not be eligible for that paid leave that's required by New York State. you are still eligible to use accruals that you have through your bargaining units, meaning sick days, personal days, vacation days for 12-month employees. And the one exception to that, the executive order, was that if your employer directs you to travel to one of these states as part of your work responsibilities, and then you get sick, then you would be eligible. I will tell you that I have not done that, and I don't anticipate ever doing that, but I'm just sharing the information with you. So it means that if you travel to Florida, one of the states, when you come back, you'll be asked to stay home for 14 days, including stay home from work. So just sharing that information with the group. Just, executive orders have a lifespan of 30 days. That's why there's so many, if you haven't noticed. They come out all the time. So if, under the emergency rules to declare these stipulations under executive orders, they're only good for 30 days. So you got to renew them. So that's why you see so many of these executive orders being issued. And that's just, sharing information with the group. And because it can be convoluted, I asked for Dr. Giganti to put something into writing so you have an opportunity to read through it, understand it. And, in certain situations, you may not have choice if, as I said before, if someone's sick or someone's ill or someone passes away, or you may not have a choice but to travel. The other important thing is these states change all the time. So yesterday, when I was looking on the website for the states, Delaware that was on there 2 days ago was removed. So states are removed and added. So, part of the consideration before you make travel plans, you'd probably want to take a look at that, knowing that when you come back, you're going to be asked to quarantine for 14 days. The next item has to do with reopening plans. So again, if you watch the news, I'm sure you do, the governor had announced several weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, that school districts and BOCES and charter schools, private schools will be required to submit reopening plans to the state. What he didn't say when he made this announcement, this was in one of his daily briefings. What he didn't say was when the plan is due. So the Board of Regents announced in early June, and to their credit, I thought it was a great idea. They said we want to get input. It was close to 1,500 people in 4 different regions. It was a 4-hour webinar where people like myself, I was part of it, but it was parents, teachers, superintendents, stakeholders. And they were given the opportunity to give input to what their concerns are about reopening a school. And the Board of Regents, the Board of Regents is like the Board of Education. So in your school district, it's not the superintendent who runs the school system, it's the Board of Education. And in New York State, it's not the governor who runs the state education department, it's the Board of Regents. So the commissioner is answerable to the Board of Regents, not to the governor. Whereas the New York State Department of Health and all the other departments, they're directly answerable to the governor. So they collected, meaning the New York State Education Department, collected a lot of information relative to recommendations, and they've been working on preparing this guidance document, which I've been told is in excess of 150 pages long. And this guidance document is supposed to inform people like myself what it is I have to do, what's recommended and what's mandated. And we were also told about a week and a half ago that the reopening of school plans that districts have to submit will be due by July 31st. So understandably, we're anxious to see this document. We haven't seen it. It was supposed to be released on Monday. It didn't happen. It was supposed to be released on Tuesday. It didn't happen. It's supposed to be released on Wednesday, yesterday. It didn't happen. Supposed to be released at 3 o'clock today. Did not happen. So it's a huge concern for everyone, you know, for me, because I own the responsibility to read through it and make sure that we're doing everything that we're required to do. But frankly, you know, just to deconstruct a 150-page document could take 2-3 weeks. You know, it's not like reading a novel. It's reading, processing, understanding, clarifying, all those things, and it takes time. It's now Thursday, so, you know, basically we got a little bit over a week to process this document and then to develop our plan and submit it to the State Ed Department. And just learned yesterday, they want you to submit it to the New York State Department of Health on a different format. If that sounds crazy, it is, because we're operating under the notion that we do this one time for the State Ed Department, and then reading through an advisory that just came out from the 28-page advisory that just came out from the New York State Department of Health. When you go to the links at the end, which I did yesterday, it speaks about submitting a reopening plan to them using a different format. And again, get this all done in a week and a half. I don't say this for sympathy. I've yet to take a vacation day since March, and I won't see vacation. And I'm no different from all the other people up here, like Nancy Kelsey, Nancy Wilson. There are not enough hours in the day to get the work done. It brings you to your knees. So it is a challenge. You know, my responsibility is looking in the eye and be honest, direct, and transparent, and I will do that. But I am bothered by the fact that we're all being put in a situation where we have to understand and digest what's very important information. You know, it's not like, you know, something that's a little bit more casual, very important information. So, but we will do it and we'll get it done. So when we get the guidance document, I have convened, I have not convened, I formed a reopening of school committee. I invited all the bargaining units to participate. I purposely selected people who I felt had the skill set and background to address issues. So for example, we all read about the need to address social, emotional, mental health issues when schools reopen, not just for students, but for staff. So, you know, I put our consultant psychiatrist on that, and probably about 6 school psychologists, social workers on it. So people weren't randomly assigned is what I'm saying. They were assigned by their background. Obviously put nurses on our committee for PPEs, personal protection equipment, supplies. So I'm waiting for the guidance to come from the state to have the committee work on these issues. You know, you can't bring the people together and say, well, this is what you're supposed to do, but we're waiting for the direction on what we're supposed to do. So that's particularly frustrating. So one of the things that I did do to make it go easy, I chaired one of the committees. I'm on the Suffolk County Superintendent's Executive Board, so I chaired one of the committees for the superintendents where we did the same thing. We were trying to identify areas that should be addressed. Instead of every district doing that, you know, you have, we had like 8 committees. You form a committee and the committee does it for all the superintendents. So what I've done is I've worked with administrators, and every committee has a list of actionable items. So when you start the committee, you're not deliberating on, well, what the heck am I supposed to do for professional development? What am I supposed to do for social, emotional, mental health learning? You know, what is it that Flynn wants me to do? What do I think I should do? So I've given actionable items so the committee will know, you know, here are 10 things that the committee needs to address. And these are typically things that administrators would address, and it takes much longer to do it by committee. But we're doing it by committee so that people are aware of all this information. It's the best way to do it. It's called transparency, and it allows for all the stakeholders in our agency to participate in the process on a firsthand basis, understand the challenges that we face, and participate in that process. So as soon as we get the guidance document, we'll be able to take a look and do a comparison between what we've put on our reopening committee templates and how it matches up against what we need to do. And I don't expect that the work of that committee to be over in a week or two. It's going to be ongoing. You know, there's going to be new direction, new guidance. You know, the governor announced again a week or two ago that he will make a decision during the first week of August 1st to the 7th, as to whether he's going to reopen schools. And by the way, that directly follows districts submitting their reopening plans. But he also explained the metrics that he's going to use. It's not a decision, there are metrics. And he said if the rate of infection is 5% or less, we're going to reopen. If it's 9% or more, we're not going to reopen. And, you know, we have to be prepared when school does eventually reopen, it will, for all the what if scenarios that are out there. You know, spikes, you know, what happens if a student or a staff member is identified? What's the protocol we're supposed to follow? We don't decide that individually. We're directed to do that by the New York State Department of Health. They'll tell us what the protocol is. But it changes. I have to tell you, back in March, before we closed, one of the school districts in Nassau County had a case of a confirmed COVID-19. They closed for a week and they cleaned the building. And then literally days later, when another district had a case, they closed for a day. And instead of cleaning the whole building, they went and cleaned the areas where that student or staff member had contact. So this is all subject to change. You know, these rules are changed and we're required to follow them. We're required to follow them. We're required to understand what are our responsibilities to do them, to do so. And, but there is a lot of what are the potential scenarios that could occur next September if in fact we open. I hope we do open because it will mean that the metrics were good. I say this in an apolitical way. I think the governor's doing a great job with managing the situation. He really has not been flexible, and he shouldn't be, in terms of telling people to not only protect yourself, but, you know, you don't have a right to go out in public without a mask if you're going to make someone else sick. You know, now people disagree with that. But in my world, you have a responsibility to protect yourself, your family, and protect other people you're interacting with. But obviously, that's not the case. It's not the case in New York State. It will be the case for us, for sure. No question about that. But, you know, that concerns me greatly. And this is serious stuff. It's not catching a common cold. It's serious stuff, as you know, as you well know. So we're waiting for this guidance document to come. We will deconstruct it. We will go through it. I meet every week, every Friday, meet with the superintendents in our region I'm now meeting since March every week, and now I'm meeting twice a week, so that we have a consensus of what districts are trying to do in terms of reopening. And we had a meeting planned tomorrow morning, anticipating we were going to get the document today at 3, and we would pull an all-nighter, and so that canceled. I just canceled that right before I came on this meeting because we don't have it. So you know, these are challenges that we have to deal with. So when we get the document, we will work on all the checkoffs. What are the things that we're required to do? And in fact, we will do that. The way to get into the details in terms of how we see this playing out, you know, we're very different from school districts in many different respects, as you know. Different in terms of our career and technical ed division, different in terms of our special ed division. So, you know, for example, virtually every district is struggling with how to get 25 kids into a classroom and still do the social distancing that's recommended. And that's 6 feet is what's recommended between a student desk. If you're wearing a protective mask, you don't have to honor the 6 feet. So think about it. You know, if you got 25 kids in your biology class at the local high school, they just cannot fit 25 kids in that classroom with 6 feet of social distancing. They cannot do it. So, you know, they're talking about, and no one's made a decision, but they're all going to make a decision by July 31st because everyone's got to submit their plan to the state. But what they have to do is some version of an A-B schedule. You know what that is? That's you got 2 groups of kids on the A schedule, and they come to school on Monday and Wednesday, and the kids on the B schedule come to school on Tuesday and Thursday, and then you alternate Fridays. Except when you do that, that's not going to be the greatest plan for parents who are trying to get back to work. They'd like a little bit more than, you know, trying to tell their employee, I'm going to be coming every other Friday. So, you know, this is what we discuss when we meet. Maybe instead of doing alternating Friday, we actually pick a Friday. On Friday, the A group is going to meet on these days and so on and so forth. So, you know, excuse the detail, but I'm going to give it a detail. I think it's important you understand what the issues are. So if you're teaching students on a Monday, Wednesday in person, and you're teaching another set of students on Tuesday and Thursday in person, who's teaching the virtual kids? Because the assumption is that roughly surveys have been about 10 to 20% of parents don't want to send their kids back to school, roughly. That's what the surveys are showing. So there's one district in Nassau County, fairly affluent district, and they've publicized this, that they're going to do live streaming, both in-person students as well as to students who are participating virtually. Very different from virtual instruction where you're doing it through a Chromebook. Live streaming is you got a camera in the back of the classroom, and that camera is capturing all the instruction live. So the students are participating in person, and they're also participating virtually because there's a link. Now, I can tell you that there are very few districts on Long Island that have the capability to do that. I will tell you overwhelmingly, most districts don't have a camera in every classroom. They certainly don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the capacity, the infrastructure, the wiring to do that. So districts are trying to struggle And it is an equity issue. It's an issue of have and have nots, make no mistake about it, particularly for poor families that still don't have internet connectivity, or they have one computer and 3 kids in the home, which is wrong, quite frankly. It's very wrong. That, you know, you talk about accessing educational opportunity, it should be an equal platform. And it's not. And I'm not being critical of the district that's doing this. They're trying to develop access for their students, but most districts can't replicate that. They just don't have the ability to do that. But I'm painting that scenario for you because districts have really become very creative in terms of their idea of developing a schedule for reopening a school, what it may look like. But taking our career in technical ed, we have to come up with a way for teachers to teach both in person and virtually using the Google platforms that we used. And we have to do it not necessarily simultaneously, but we have to do it together. And I'm going to explain the reasons why to you, so it's very clearly understood. If you have one group of students come to school on a Monday and Wednesday, and if you have another group of students coming on a Tuesday, Thursday, and then they alternate to Friday, we got to be open for both groups of students. We have to be open for both groups of students to satisfy the enrollment. It's as simple as that. It's not complicated. It's as simple as that. So, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm trying to protect everyone and keep everyone employed. And if we're not open every day in CTE, we will not be able to educate those kids who are on these modified schedules. And districts really have no choice because they can't fit the kids in their classrooms. Now, we've had a huge challenge this summer in trying to, take out the tape measure and measure 6 feet in our CTE classes, in our special ed classes. And our CTE programs, they're large, they're not typical classrooms. You have large areas to do this, and based on my conversations, we can do it. We can protect the social distancing. We have to work out the details of how this would be done. So, for example, I don't see a child participating all day on a computer. I know that in CTE you have what I'm going to call the academic component of the program, the clinic, and versus the clinical program or the clinical aspect of the program. And this is what I'm thinking, although it's a shared decision-making process, is during that academic piece, students will be participating through the Google platform. And after that's over, they don't participate anymore because the teacher's got to go and tune up the car. I've talked about spark plugs and gapping and whatever the issue is, culinary arts. And so how do you have the kids who are participating virtually gain from that? Well, maybe you tape a piece of that lab component. You tape the spark plug being gapped and installed, and it's posted somewhere. Of course, there's always concerns about privacy, taking a picture of students, but we have to figure a way through this. This is a serious situation for us, and we have to figure out ways to do this safely and appropriately, so we can continue to offer our services, so we can continue to keep everyone here come September. It's as simple as that. And we've given tremendous thought and discussion to all of this. And in CTE, but to a greater degree in special ed, the classrooms it looks like the Grand Canyon. We're moving furniture out, we're moving everything out of that room to ensure that we can have the 6 feet of distancing in those rooms, to a lesser degree in CTE. That is our priority. That we will do. That we will not compromise on. So in special ed, that paradigm is not happening. You know, in CTE, you might say to your class, here's the photography lesson today. You know, here's the culinary lesson today in theory. You're not going to take 4 children with autism who are being educated in person and simultaneous to that be providing virtual instruction to the 2 kids at home. That just doesn't happen. And we've learned that. And that's the challenges in working with a special ed population. So it can happen. It can happen with the CTE. It can happen. It is doable. But with special ed, you cannot suggest, unless the parent is a certified teacher, that they're going to be able to participate virtually simultaneously, particularly on an everyday level, most of the day level. It can't happen. What can happen, and here's the key, and excuse me for saying it, but I'm going to say it. It's what's in the best interest of the student. That's the question to ask yourself. So if you have 100 students in special ed, and if 80 of them are coming to school in person, and 20 are at home being educated virtually, we will take whatever the normal staffing is for 80 students, and those teachers will teach those 80 students in classrooms in person. And then there'll be a separate, different group of special ed teachers who would teach for the other 20 students. And for those other 20 students who are being taught virtually, we'll do what we've been doing for 4 months. We're going to do small group instruction, individual instruction. We're going to follow IEP goals. We're going to do all that individualized instruction that you cannot do in a group setting, because that's what's appropriate and necessary for those children. And what it does is we have 100 kids, and everyone, all the teachers who normally would be employed for those 100 students, they're going to be employed, but some will be teaching in person, some will be teaching virtually. Could there be teachers who might say, but I don't want to teach in person, or I don't want to teach virtually? You know, and we're not going to make those accommodations, and we can't make those accommodations. We have to get this thing done. We have to keep people safe, and we have to do the right thing by children. And that's going to be the guidance that we're going to be implementing. And then we all hope, and we say a prayer that they have 2 vaccines reported last week that have been successful in trials. They're going to field test them this fall and winter, and if successful, roll them out, you know, next winter, next spring, which I've been saying all along. And hopefully we look back upon this period as a memory, and we're back to some sense of normalcy for next year or towards the end of the year. We need to get through this year. So those are the thoughts that we've been coming up with, quite frankly, and I'm sharing them with you. And I always believe in people who have solutions that work. I always believe in, it's always better to have 2 people looking at a problem than 1 and 10 instead of 2, and so on and so forth. So seriously, if you have suggestions, we welcome that. We look forward to that, to make this thing work for everyone, for the staff and for the students. So in terms of other important issues, we've had a spike in enrollment in our special ed elementary program in Dix Hills, James Young Elementary School. It was unexpected, but it's there. If you were to ask me, why is that? And I'm asked that question frequently. particularly from the BOCES board. I don't have an answer. I'll speculate and tell you that in looking at the new students that are coming in, they're mostly kids with behavioral disorders. They're mostly kids with mental health issues, and they're mostly kids with severe autism. Are they being referred as a result of COVID-19? Maybe. But the bottom line is we find a way to take those students, or we sign off and they go to the other BOCES or they go to a private school. I will guarantee you there is no private school that's going to waiver those kids. They will take all those kids in. So what I've been doing personally for the last month and a half is trying to find space where we can solve two issues. One at the elementary school to be able to take this spike in new referrals to the program. And also try and open up space in that facility, because that school, it just has, it has the most small classrooms where it's just particularly challenging to try and create social distancing there. So by moving children out of that building, we're able to take new students in, and we're able to create more space for staff to have sufficient social distancing. That's the plan. We do not have a school. We do have that we've locked in on. We do have a school that we think will work really well. The Board of Ed has not of that particular district has not met to discuss it. They will do shortly. And I'm not at liberty to share any information beyond that, because the board members in that district have to hear about it before you hear about it. And they have to make a decision if they're willing to lease rooms. And by the way, that's a tremendous lift. Parents, dealing with the parents of kids who are going to be moved from the elementary school down to another facility, getting that facility up to snuff, furniture. It's a huge, huge, huge lift to do with everything else we're trying to do. But we're doing that. Now, we just could have said we don't have room. I want to be clear about that. We just could say we don't have room. Go to Nassau, BOCES in Suffolk. They've been losing kids. They'd love to capture these kids. Be perfectly clear about this. And any kids they couldn't, you go to the private schools. This is a lot of work, and I'm proud of all the people who work for BOCES, and the districts. They love our programs. They love the elementary school. It shouldn't be happening, but they need our services. They're referring these children, and I'm going to take every one of them. And I'm going to be very honest. They feed the rest of the special ed program as they move up. Keeps us where we are. So hopefully we can bring closure to that in the next couple of weeks, but it's just another issue that we're dealing with. And I'm optimistic it's going to work out. I've been to the facility several times, obviously spoken with the superintendent. So I'm optimistic we can make that work. And then, reassess where we are next year. Was that just a spike, or is that part of a trend in terms of space needs? I'd like to take some time, because I think it's very important for you to know this. We get advisories all the time from the New York State Department of Health. So just so you understand how this works, the federal CDC Center issues guidance and recommendations, but it's federal guidance. our states are supposed to take that guidance, interpret it, and then issue the directives to the field. So not that we ignore CDC, we don't. Let's look at all their guidance where we want to be informed by CDC. But we follow the direction of the New York State Department of Health. When they tell us something is required, we do it. If the CDC said something is recommended, well, that's interesting. They recommend 6 feet, but it's not mandated. So just so you understand the process. So these are very important documents, and we get them regularly. And I read them very carefully, and I reread them very carefully. So here's the guidance, because I think you want to know answers to these questions. I would, if I was in your situation. So this particular document talks about face coverings. So this is, days old. So here's the guidance that we're going to have to follow, and you're going to have to follow. With respect to face coverings. And by the way, excuse me for repeating myself. I'm sure I said this last time, but most districts go out and buy face masks, They go to the purchasing agent, they say, order 10,000 face masks. We didn't do that. We didn't do that. It took about 5 weeks for about 6 administrators to go through about 50 of these cloth facial coverings and select the final 8 or 10. And then we brought a committee of 20 with our school nurses, school doctors, and representatives of the unions. And we said, pick a winner. Now, just so you understand the process, there is no certification by any agency that says this face mask works and this doesn't. Wouldn't you think, though, that's important information? That you're wearing a facial covering that actually captures the particles that's coming out of someone's mouth? So, we called up the Department of Health and we said, help us with this. We're not experts on facial coverings, but we want to pick a facial covering that's effective, that works for our staff and students, right? Well, do the water test and do the light test. Okay, tell me what a water test is. Never heard of that before. Well, pour water into the face mask, and if it doesn't leak through in 3 seconds or so, it's capturing the particles. And I said, okay, and light the same thing, put it up to a light and see if there's light infiltration. So we did that. And I had nothing to do with the selection of the facial mask, nothing. The committee did, staff did it, 100%. But I did try it on. I said, let me try on and they did a great job. They picked the only 4-ply mask I've seen. Most of these facial coverings are 2-ply, 1-ply, 2-ply, 3. It's a 4-ply mask. So it has a lot of protection. It's cotton. It's got nice, big, wide bands on it. The staff did a much better job than I could ever do. And I thank them for doing that. Took a lot of work and a lot of effort. But I say that for obvious reasons. We're not casual about making decisions. And I don't speak badly about other districts, where someone says, go, pick them and order them. We went to a lot of time and effort to protect our staff and students, to give you the best protection possible. And we had the staff make those decisions. So with respect to facial masks, school districts must maintain procedures for students, faculty, staff, and other individuals. And the other individuals are later defined in other sections of the document as visitors to the building. They must wear face masks. And when it comes to students, there is many different sources of how that's interpreted and how you should apply those requirements. But if you're under 2, or if you cannot tolerate wearing a mask, and if you're a student, you're excused from wearing a mask. And, don't look for anything more than that, because that's all it says. So I read something recently where it said if you have a medical reason you're excused from that. I read something recently in this document that says during the instructional day, students can remove their mask when they have to eat, and they can remove their mask, during instruction. But I'm not gonna implement that. I want everyone wearing their mask all day long. All day long. It's not easy. I put these masks on all weekend just to see what it feels like. It's a royal pain in the neck. Breathe your own air in for all Saturday. It's not easy. But we don't have a choice. We got to protect ourselves, our families, our children, our staff, students. And same thing goes for staff. And the guidance that goes on here later says that students and staff can use their own cloth facial coverings. And if they don't want to provide their own, the school district is required to provide it for both the staff and the students. And that's the direction, and we will follow the direction because the State Department of Health tells me that I have to let staff wear their own mask or students wear their own mask. I focus on that because everything we hear about this is one of the most important things we can do to protect one another is the facial covering. That's why I harp on this. It's important we get the right covering. It's important that we wear it, and it's important that to the degree possible we have students wearing it as much as possible, 6 feet or not. If you're beyond 6 feet, you don't have to wear your covering. I want people to wear it all the time because people are up and moving and kids are up and moving and we're going to run and put the mask on all quick. And no. So that's, and in addition to that, I mentioned earlier, we got rubber gloves. I mean, we went through more Virex in the 3 weeks before we closed than we went through in the 6 or 7 months, which that's a function of using the Virex. It's a good thing. It's a good thing, but we are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on all this protection, hundreds of thousands of dollars, thousands and thousands and thousands of face masks, gloves, gowns, facial shields, so on and so forth. The other issue is, just to mention it, one of the issues for school districts was the requirement for social distancing on buses, on transportation. It's so if you take a typical 54 passenger large bus that kids use to travel to school in the morning, go home on it, and I've seen, webinars where they actually enact on the bus, how many kids you can get on the bus if you do 6 foot social distancing. It's about 9 kids. So, run the math in your mind. So if a bus can't, now buses don't have 54 kids on 54 passenger buses, but they have a lot of kids on there. And if you have to do 6 foot social distancing, you just tripled or quadrupled your transportation budget. But the districts don't have to worry about it because the companies don't have the buses or the drivers to provide 3 or 4 times the amount of buses. So it was conspicuously absent. One of the things I went for to see if they put in the guidance from the Department of Health about the social distancing, and all it said is you have to maintain appropriate social distancing on the bus. Make no mistake about it, I believe that was done purposely to address that issue. So what districts have been encouraged to do is to reach out to parents, and I believe this is going to happen, and have parents drive their kids to and from school. And that may help alleviate some of this. Now, as you know, we have we don't do the to and from busing, to and from school. That's the responsibility of the school district. But we do have shuttles, you know, that take kids among the various high schools back and forth from CTE to special ed. We have buses that transport some of our developmentally disabled students to vocational training sites. We have field trips, you know, so we're not going to be looking to do any of those except the ones that are required. So if a child has to get from one school to another, you know, we'll look to do that. And you know, cleaning of buses is a whole other issue. So we're, you know, we have to, our contract expired with our carrier this year. So we all anticipate there's going to be a substantial increase in the bid, the awarding of the bid for the buses we have to use in September. But we put in the bid specs, we want the bus cleaned down in between every run. So you take a, you know, one of these handy wipes that's treated with antivirus, antibacterial elements, and you wipe down the seat, you wipe down the handlebars. But there will be a price for that, obviously, that we have to pay. So that's, you know, social distancing. There is other guidance for social distancing, actually for larger distances. In certain types of aerobic activities, we have heavy breathing, or you're singing. They use illustrations of that nature, which we will honor. You know, no question about it. We'll honor every one of these. You know, period. Cohorts. It's a concept, and the concept is that one of the requirements is for every classroom to maintain a log of every person that's come in and out of that room during the day. Put their name on a log, and the teacher has to do that. And so someone, you know, someone's well-intentioned was telling me the other day, you know, when are we supposed to do that? Like, you know, we're supposed to be teaching, not filling out logs. And I said, you know, I get it. I get the frustration. We're all frustrated. But I said, if someone gets sick in your classroom, don't you want to be able to know? Because the incubation period for COVID-19 could be for a couple of days to 4 days, generally speaking. So, you know, you could be transmitting the disease before you're symptomatic. And if you have a confirmed case, we need to do tracing. Tracing is finding out if I have a confirmed case, all the people I had contact with over the past 2-3 days, and then notify those people that you had exposure. Now, remember, exposure, you have to define this. Exposure isn't walking by someone. It's having a conversation within 6 feet without protection for some say 10 minutes, some say 15 minutes. So if you stop someone in the hallway and say, how was your summer? And you have a mask, that's not exposure. But the point is, yeah, you're filling out a log and someone comes in and you have to stop what you're doing, put that person on the log. But for what purpose? So that if someone does have a confirmed case, we can go to tell that person. We have to do that. You know, I'm sorry for the interruption. And, you know, everyone's entitled to express their frustration. We all need to do it. But, you know, there are certain things that we just can't compromise on. And we're directed to do this by the Department of Health. Now, as part of that cohort type of mentality, what we're being told to do is keep those kids together for the whole day as much as possible and do push in service to the degree possible. And you get the idea. You know, if a child goes to lunch with 5 other classes, 10 other classes, and there's a confirmed case of a student having COVID-19 in that class. Now the number of people who've been exposed to that child have gone from the students in the class to every child who's in that cafeteria, potentially. Now, you know, you would go in there, and when you do tracing, you know, you talk about people who are within 6 feet. So, you know, it could be the table next to you, or to the right of you, or to the left of you. It's not the whole group, unless the child got up and went to another area and sat at someone's table, or went to throw something out or whatever. But you get the concept. The more people or the more movement in a class outside that class, the more likelihood of, if there is someone who has a confirmed case, that you would have exposed someone. So it doesn't mean we do push in for every service, because it may be that you come into a classroom and, you know, pick any one of the related services you have, like we'll pick physical therapy. It doesn't really lend itself to a classroom environment, right? It's gross motor activities, walking up steps, it's gait, it's balance, you know, it doesn't lend itself. So does it make sense to do that in a classroom? Or bring a child to a physical therapy area where they have exposure to 2, 3, 4, 5 other staff members or students? Or you have a speech therapist come in and there's no room for them to do push-in. It's a small classroom. You can't do the 6-foot social distancing. So, I mean, these are the decisions we have to make every day. But to the degree possible, we want to keep that class isolated. It doesn't mean you can't go out and use the playground. God, we got to go out and use the playground. Got to do that. It just means that when you do it, there's no other classes out there. And it means someone's got to wipe down that playground before the next class goes out. That's what it means. That's the idea of cohorts, screenings. The document says responsible parties, but that's us, that's school districts. So I'm going to read what it says. School districts must implement mandatory. That means it's not recommended. It means we must do it. Mandatory health screenings, including temperature checks of students, staff, vendors, visitors. So, you know, I'll tell you, I've told this story already. So everyone knows I went to the eye doctor 3 weeks ago. And the, you know, woman shoots the temperature at my forehead, and I have a 97-degree temperature. And I said, gee, I've never had a 97-degree temperature. What gives? What's going on? And he said, oh, well, how'd you get here? I said, well, I drove in a car. You know, it was a hot day. Do you have the air conditioner? Of course. So it's blowing on my face. Says, yeah, you probably have the air conditioner on your forehead. So I said, look, I don't want to take your time up. You have a job here, but what if I rode my bike here? You know, and I had 101 temperature, you know, not because I have a fever, but because I've been exercising, you know, rigorously. Could my temperature go up? Oh yeah, absolutely could. So, you know, you find out is there are a lot of variables that influence temperatures. I went to a vendor a couple of weeks ago, and I apologize, I might have told you this already, but it was the vendor that has the contract to do thermal temperature scanning for Northwell hospitals, for the Catholic Health Hospital systems, and for Stony Brook. And it wasn't coincidental. I told my purchasing agent, find out who they have contracts with, because they should know how to do temperature screenings. So they have these thermal cameras. They're like, 18,000 plus all the accessories, probably, I don't know, 25,000 a camera. And they're reported to be, very accurate. And so I said, so how does this thing work? And these thermal cameras, these expensive cameras, they can allegedly record multiple people coming through an entrance. And so I said, so, if you got 50 kids walking through, they can identify the kids or staff. And he said, yeah. I said, well, just answer a question for me. All our staff are wearing face masks. So how does that work? How do you identify people with face masks on? And they said, oh, well, we have facial recognition software built into the system. I said, oh, okay, I get it. So the software can, see that Mike Flynn is wearing a mask and identify it at Mike Flynn. Well, not all the time. Maybe not. I said, well, what about the maybe nots? Well, then we'll send you an email, the principal, and you'll have to figure out who that was. I said, well, that's a heck of a system. And I asked the question, and I said, did the hospitals give any pushback for the facial identity? Because when you take my picture and load it into a software system, and you take my temperature and keep a record of that, that's medical information. So, and I recognize that, and we'd have to protect that information. Meaning it would go into your personnel file. At some point, I guess we would get rid of it. But it's privileged information. It's protected information. We can't release it to anyone without your permission. But I will tell you straight out that there were some people in some hospitals that objected to it. They didn't want their medical information. I don't object to that. But that doesn't mean there aren't people listening in who do object to it. But to me, it's very simple in life. I want to keep myself healthy so I don't infect anyone. And I don't care if someone is taking my temperature and putting it in a file. I could care less. You may, and I respect your right to do that. But I've said to you before, I'm going to say it again. I said, if you want me to protect you, you have to be complicit with these requirements, procedures, and protocols that keep you and us safe. So, so looking at, just to finish the story, take the elementary school. I mentioned it before. You have over 300 kids there, and you got about 375 staff. How the heck, if you're not going to use the fancy camera, you're going to use the handheld temperature devices, which are not as accurate as the, because they're like $50, $100, whatever. Who's doing that? Who is taking the temperature for nearly 700 staff and students? And how long is that taking? See, they don't tell you that in the guidance. They just tell you what you have to do. You got to figure out how to make this work. So one of the things I'm exploring, making sure that, I speak to our school attorney almost every day, making sure it's legal, is have you, the staff, participate in an app, because we are actually field testing some of these apps. Part of the temperature screening, staff also have to participate in a screening. So if any one of your spouses or family members or children work for a private company, they do this every day, because that's what the private companies do. You get up in the morning and, before you get your news day and read it, you go and you take your temperature, and then you go on your phone and you fill out the app, you answer those 4 or 5 questions, and then you answer the question, did you take your temperature? Yes. Do you have a fever? No. And then when you come to work, it's some kind of barcode, almost like getting on an airplane. Boom. You answered all the questions with the proper responses, and you can come to work. And what that would do is, it is the honor system. And I'm counting on everyone who's listening in that you will please not come to work if you're sick. You will not do that to us. And I have confidence that the staff recognizes that responsibility. And that we can screen people that way. With the students, quite frankly, it's more of a challenge. You know, I was literally a special ed principal in every school in special ed before I came uptown here. So I know about 6 kids, and I know about parents putting sick kids on the bus and sending them to school. I know all about that. I know all about trying to reach the parent and not picking the phone up to pick their kids up. So that's a challenge. We could have the parents participate in a process like this. I'm assuming that the overwhelming majority of parents will say, I want to keep my child safe. It's the most important thing in the world, my child. That's why I work 2 or 3 jobs, my child. And I want to protect all children. But I just can't go as far as to say I think that will have full compliance based on my experience. I hope it would. I hope the circumstances dictate that, but these are huge problems that we have to figure out. I'm trying to figure out how we're going to get the hundreds of thousands of dollars for all the PPEs. We don't have an unrestricted reserve. School districts do, we don't. We don't have a rainy day fund, that 4% of your budget fund. So these are challenges. By the way, it's absolutely the right thing to do. I absolutely support it. Your temperature, your face mask, your social distancing. We should be doing it to protect one another. 100%. I'm on board. Yeah, it's got to be inconvenient. It's got to be expensive. It's going to be a lot of things, but we have no choice. And by the way, the temperature, because this varies depending on who you're reading. I was curious what temp, I've seen 101.4, you know, I've seen many different temperatures. New York State is saying 100.0, 98.6 is normal, 100.0 or greater. Greater, excuse me, it's greater than 100.0 Fahrenheit. So, and then the other thing, just to, get it out there, where there's wording here that it does concern me. It has to do with contract tracing. I'm sure you've heard about that term. It's when someone is confirmed to have the virus, someone tracks down all the people that you had exposure to advise those people that you might have had exposure and be on the lookout for symptoms of COVID-19. Right? It's absolutely the right thing to do. 100%. So it says here, school districts will develop plans to support local health departments in tracing all contacts of the individual in accordance with the protocols, training, and tools provided for the New York State contact tracing program. So, I'll tell you, I had a situation. We had closed schools. It was back in March, but it was maybe the week after we closed schools. Got a call on a Sunday afternoon. Someone had a confirmed case of COVID-19. They had been in a meeting the previous Friday afternoon, and they wanted to report it to me, and I wanted to report it to the health department, which I did. And you report it to the health department where the person lives, not where they work. So this is a Sunday afternoon call. And so I reported it, so on and so forth. And then I was told by the doctor, well, you got to contact these 12 people. They had a meeting with this person on Friday and let them know about this. And I said, whoa, time out. I'm an administrator. I'm not a public health nurse. Someone's got to call these people, but you and your staff, they have to be told. No, we don't have the staff. Every county became overwhelmed. You know, Suffolk County put a system into place with a portal. It was up for about a week. After that, it just, you know, when the numbers started to climb, no one had the manpower to do the tracing. So I said, you know, I don't want to call these people. They're gonna ask me a ton of questions that I don't have a clue relative to health issues. Well, if you don't call, they're not going to get notified because we don't have the manpower to make those calls. So good luck, sir. So I picked the phone up and called those people. You know, what you have to do, you have to let people know. But sure enough, you can imagine getting a call like that from me on a Sunday night. Mike, what does this mean? Should I call my doctor? Should I go to the hospital emergency room? How do I know if I'm sick? You know, a dozen questions that I have no capacity to answer. So I don't want to be put in, and I read that carefully. I don't want myself or you to be put into a situation where we're having contact tracing responsibilities. It's not our job. I don't mind working 15 hours a day. I'll do that. I do mind doing things I'm not qualified to do. And I don't want my staff doing it, putting you in that situation. But I worry about that statement. You know, keeping a log in your classroom so we can help the process, we're good to go. But calls. All right, well, look, this thing goes on for 28 pages. But I cherry picked the things that were, I thought, important for you to know, things that would be on your mind. So that's it. I had 10 items. I stopped at 10. Happy to answer any questions. I don't know, Evan or Devin or who's going to monitor. If anyone has a question, open up and please feel free to ask the question. Do my best to answer it.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet. I think some will be coming through. But I did have a question has there been any discussion as far as APPR for next year? Will it be in play? Will it be, waived again? Has there been any discussion around that?
The answer is no. The answer is I know the answer, but it's not official. The state ed, and that's part of what's going to be in the guidance document that we're waiting to receive. It's going to talk about APPR. What I've been led to believe is that districts will have to, the state is not going to waiver APPR like they did last year. It was waived. But that could happen depending upon whatever happens next year. You know, if we're going virtual, it's very difficult to do APPR and evaluate people. But the notion is that the thinking is that school's gonna open up and administrators are gonna be able to evaluate, principals will be evaluated and teachers will be evaluated. And the state education department wants to give flexibility to that process, given the circumstances that we're all gonna be working under. And they're talking about not waivers, because waivers suggest that the requirements are no longer there, but applications to modify your APPR plan. But again, that's what I've been told because, you know, I ask those questions when I'm speaking with the state ed department people. And but we'll see what happens in the guidance document. That's what we're waiting for.
Flynn, Donna Levine, could I get back to the COVID specific situation? Can you hear me?
Donna, I can, absolutely. How may I help you, please?
With regard to, I understand the whole thing with the log and taking everyone's temperature and whatnot, but suppose let's just say a child does have a temperature and we have about 10 of them in one day, okay? So now we have 10 people that have to go down to the nurse, whose office is very small. So cubicles need to be set up to put these 10 kids in isolation because you cannot stick a possible COVID patient with someone who's got strep or the flu or whatever. There's also a point of care testing equipment that is available that can give you an immediate result within 15 to 45 minutes. So you know right then and there whether this person who potentially has COVID has it or not. You have no guarantee that this person is going to go home, get tested. Now we got some places make you wait 10 days for results. So in the interest of the tracing and knowing and protection, it might be worth looking into this type of system. Also, my other thought was, as far as temperature taking for the students, letting them into the classrooms, they might already have a temperature. The only true way to get a true reading on their temperature is for somebody to get on the bus with the equipment, because they'll be in a contained area in a certain temperature. Because we know once they walk out, hit the cold, hit the hot, it's gonna thermal, it's gonna change it. So I don't know who that person is, but that would be the best place to take the temperatures before they get off the bus. Be there with the log, names, and what the temperature is. And if they're sick, they go to the isolation area and either get picked up or perhaps think about this point of care test that is available. I don't know the cost or anything like that. It's not complicated. And it would, I think, make things a lot easier for whether or not someone has it or not, and letting people know. Because we cannot rely on the kids or the parents to have their kids tested. We can't even rely on the kids to keep their masks. How many people do you see with their masks not even over their noses? There's a lot of education that has to go on with, like what you said, proper mask wearing, proper hand hygiene, very important.
No. Well, no, it's not.
Hands off your face.
No.
So just thought,
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate the suggestions. Yeah, we're looking at isolation rooms. It's, it's on the list.
maybe cubicles set up in the Wilsonian room for Dix Hills, as long as they're 6 feet apart. Should be simple. Simple
There,
cubicle.
there's a belief system out there that districts can set up wedding tents outside their schools and set up a triage to do this temperature taking. And,
Can't do it outside.
and it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But we are, I'm particularly concerned with two of our schools, the special ed elementary and special ed Melville program. I don't know what the exact count is, but there's roughly about, give or take, 45 students there that have private duty nurses. That means that these nurses travel to the student's home, park their car, and get on the bus with the child, and they stay with the child all day. And to have that level of medical care, it means that you have some significant medical issues. And in prioritizing where I have to be concerned, I'm very concerned about those children because if they get sick, it could have significant consequences, quite frankly. And trying to figure out how we protect them. So we are looking at, isolation rooms or isolation areas. It doesn't have to be a separate room. It could be an area of the nurse's office if it's protected, screened off. But you don't know what you're dealing with, if it's going to be one person or 6 people or whatever the case might be. And then, here we are trying to find space in buildings where there is no space. And then trying to identify, how we handle this. I would say, Donna, I would absolutely not support administering a test in school to a student. I would not do that. I would call the
The problem is our kids don't get tests checked. So
Yeah,
does it-
I
does-
would-
When your kid has a sniffle, they get COVID test?
hold on. I would tell the parent to pick your child up and bring your child to the doctor.
Good luck on that one.
Yeah, well, it could be,
They are doing it at camps. They are. They have the equipment at, like they have it at Park Shore, a couple of different camps. They have the equipment right on site. So, I mean, it is being done. It's just a thought for you, just to be a little bit more protective. You know, if I don't even know if it's a possibility, it just would give us the answer we need to know whether or not we have a COVID student in our midst, and then take it from there. Because then you got to go into all the other things you got to go into. You know, the whole.
so again, thank you for that. Again, I would not support administering a medical test to a child in our school.
Okay.
Responsibility of the parent. And by the way, it's in the packets that students are not permitted or staff to re-enter the building until they're cleared to do so. That's part of our protocol in any event. But where to conduct the temperature testing and get people on buses to do this, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and it's something that we have to do now because we're required to do it. And how we manage that and how we pay for it is a huge challenge, quite frankly. But we'll get it done. We'll have to figure out the best way to do it. I think that we're on solid grounds asking our staff to be responsible to do that. I question all the parents having that same level of responsibility. Some parents might say, I got to get to work, and may put the kid on the bus. They might be sick, might have a temperature. I agree with that. That's a huge concern, how we need to address that. And a list of things we talk about every day. Thank you, Donna, for the question. Anyone else with a question, please?
Yeah, Mr. Flynn, the chat is moving quickly, so I'm doing my best to keep up with it. I've seen a couple of questions coming through about, and I guess do your best to answer it at this point. I don't know if it's possible, about quarantining and having to take days off work, just, from living your life and following appropriate guidelines if you are told that you have been exposed and it's recommended by the Department of Health or whomever is the qualified people to tell you that you need to quarantine for those 14 days. How will that affect your sick days, your sick bank? Would that be covered time? A lot of questions related to that.
Yeah, well, I can somewhat answer the question. I mentioned before, governor's executive orders have a shelf life of 30 days. So whatever we say today certainly will not be in place in September if we open school. It will be whatever iteration of the executive order will be in place at that point in time. I can tell you that in general, that there is a state law, and it's the same law I referred to at the beginning of the conversation, where the governor provides for employees like BOCES to provide paid leave, meaning that your accruals are not impacted for people who fit into different categories of quarantine. And it's not just, I don't have it in front of me and I'm not going to cite it from memory, but I can tell you there are different categories, and it's not just for someone who might be quarantined themselves. You might be quarantined as a spouse, or you might have a child to care for. There are different levels of protections that are available, and whatever is in play at that point, we're required to implement, and we will do that, whatever that might be. I would suspect that the state would continue those paid leave executive orders. I can't say they will, but I would suspect they would, given the concept that the governor's feelings is that there are people who may not have accruals and need the money to put food on the table. I'm speculating, but I think most people would agree with that. But whatever requirements are in play at the time, we're required to follow those requirements, and we will. And you have my assurance we will.
Thank you. Hang on. 1 second. Sorry. There was another question about people with pre-existing conditions or, staff members with risk factors as far as being in person or being remote. Any, thoughts on how the agency may be dealing with people, with employees that are considered high risk?
If there are people who feel that they're not able to resume in person, we have a process for that. We have last time I looked at it, 6 or 7 pages. It's a packet, and it's a packet that staff need to complete to request accommodations. And their doctor has to fill out a large portion of that packet. I will tell you that your fear of coronavirus is not qualified to exempt you from coming back to work in person. But if your doctor feels that you're not able to work because of some risk factor or medical factor, and is willing to put that into writing, we're obligated to follow that process and then make a decision. And the decision is ultimately, is the request or the ask, quote unquote, a reasonable request for an accommodation. And that's an administrative decision that we make based upon the documentation that's submitted with the packet. So there is a process in place. It's the same process we've been using for years and years and years. People have surgery on their back, very common, and they can't lift more than, 10 pounds for 3 months. And we asked them to fill out the packet, and, historically, I will speak for the agency on this case, we've been very supportive of people who have a temporary situation like that in terms of trying to find an assignment for them to recover. But it's the same process. It's been in place for years, and people should follow the process. But I need to tell you that just a general fear, there are certain people who are fearful about coming back. They don't have, and I get it, anxiety, whatever. But that's not typically something that would qualify for an accommodation under federal guidelines. But I would never make that kind of judgment until someone filled out a packet, and we go through the process of reviewing the information in the packet.
Okay, thank you. Another question about just, I guess, in line with protocols in the building for keeping sanitization and keeping things clean. Has there been any thought to using UV lights in the buildings?
Yes and no. We know about them. We've discussed it. It's another form of technology. As everyone will know, it was a short-lived period, but in the week or two before closing, we did adopt new cleaning protocols. So we had custodians going around buildings cleaning what we call high-touch surfaces during the day. And that's everything you think it is. It's doorknobs, light switches, and so on and so forth. So, we recognize the need to provide proper sanitization every night. And we're going to ask people to do that in their classrooms. That's where it starts. Keep your surfaces clean throughout the day. And we would look to, I'm sure, replicate what we put into place with high touch surfaces. And part of the requirements, part of our plan is to talk about what we have in mind for keeping the building clean. We have not made any decision about using the lights, the ultraviolet lights at all. There are, many different devices. There's a device that's like a fogger. You fog the room, and all different devices there. But it's really wearing a mask and wearing gloves and washing your hands when you don't have a glove on, and cleaning surfaces that you touch. And I know that our supervisor for maintenance, when he put this into place, he actually typed up a checklist. So you wouldn't tell the custodian, here are the 22 areas you need to wipe down when you go into a class at night. He typed them all up so everyone knows, okay, every light switch gets cleaned up. You know, every hard surface gets cleaned up. We're going to have to ask for staff to keep the surfaces clean. You know, we're going to have to ask to limit the number of supplies that aren't cleanable, because we'd like to have custodians be able to wipe down surfaces and supplies in rooms that can be wiped down, and limit having supplies in classrooms that are not, and keeping the desk, you know, uncluttered. So these are things that we've been talking about. That's why I can speak to them firsthand. A lot of bases to touch, but clearly doing the clean is very important. And, you know, we have to see what we're going to be exposed to, quite frankly. You know, do we have one student or staff identified in a month, or do we have it one a day? I mean, we don't know. We truly don't know. And what we have to be prepared to, though, is to react to that. And we will be. Next question, Devin.
So two actually questions that just kind of piggyback off of what you were just saying. First, I'll say with the building protocol, someone asked about the air filtration and these HEPA filters that some places are required. Are we in line with those requirements, or would we be upgrading our air filtration?
The answer is yes. There is no specific requirement that you have to use a specific filter. When you have, it's just like your home air conditioning system, you know, where the air return, there's a filter there. We have the same filters in our schools. And we already have upgraded to a higher density filter, which will capture more particles than the other filters. But even if you wanted to, and these filters, they're like oil filters, you know, there's many different oil filters for different cars, many different filters for systems. You can't put any filter in there that has a high degree to capture if it's not rated for the system. What happens is that if you have a filter that's restricting the airflow because the weave, the material is restricting the airflow, it'll burn out the motor, literally burn out the motor. So we have replaced filters. We're in the process of doing that to go to a higher grade filter. And we're going as close as we can go to a filter that has increased capacity to filter out particles without running the risk of burning out the motors.
And then the other, how you just mentioned about, we don't know what it's going to be, if it's one person a quarter or one person is, you know, whatever it is. Do you know if a student or a staff member in a classroom is positive COVID-19, do you know how far reaching that quarantine would look like? Would it be just that classroom? Would it even be everybody in that classroom? Do you have any idea on that at this point?
The answer is yes and no. I would not be the person to make any of those decisions. The Department of Health would. And when we, you know, as I said previously, in the week prior to closing school, we had a number of people who reported to their administrator that they had, or they thought they had, a possible exposure to someone with COVID-19. So when we got that information, the information was reportable through a portal. So you didn't make a phone call, you filled out a form. There were forms that were provided by the Suffolk County Department of Health. They were filled out, you documented the report, and that went to the county, and then you got a call back from the public health nurse on duty. And they would take responsibility to ask questions, to say, well, I got all this information in the packet. The packet might have been 4 or 5 pages long. I need to clarify some information. I need to ask some questions. And then I'll tell you, if we have to take any action. And my memory is roughly, it might have been a dozen of those reports filed. None of them came out positive. And I don't mean to suggest that that was a wasted effort. It was absolutely the right thing to do. Because if people come to us, some people had traveled to areas or countries where there was a high risk incident, and people are trying to do the right thing. And they said, I'm not sick, but I might have had exposure. And they did the right thing, and we did the right thing. We followed the protocol that we were told to follow. And ultimately, Devin, it was the Suffolk County Department of Health that made the decision in every case as to what action, if any, was necessary in every one of those reports. I'm going to anticipate that that's going to be the same process. We don't know what that process is yet. It has not been spelled out by the local Suffolk County Health Department. And I was on a conference call today with the executive board for the Superintendent's Association. And, we were talking about that. And I had some issues because we're meeting with the Suffolk County Department of Health shortly to say we want to know what system we're all going to be following when we reopen school, so that we know what it is we should be doing in terms of what the requirements are. And they're trying to figure that out, I'm sure, right now. So no, I don't know specifically what protocols will be put into place because the local health department will do that. But yes, I'm going to assume they're going to put a protocol into place that looks to quarantine people who have met the criteria that they develop where that is warranted. And they're good people in the county health department that we've dealt with in the past. And I'm confident they'll come up with a system that is workable and protects us to the degree that we're not part of making medical decisions for this process.
Hi, Mike, it's Holly. Devin got kicked off somehow. So it's not like she just disappeared. I see that it looks like the other questions are going to be about people taking sick leave to care for family members, taking sick leave because they're sick, taking sick leave because a student in their classroom is sick. Is that all addressed in Hugh's memo?
No, use memo, Holly. And by the way, hi.
Right.
Use memo only deals with one slice of the discussion having to do with individuals that travel to these hotspot states. It's an advisory. And because this stuff is so confusing, I wasn't comfortable telling you, here's the executive order, go online and read it, interpret it. So I said, let's write something that's easily understood so staff know that here's what they're going to be presented with. By the way, if you remember, when the pandemic first broke, there was similar restrictions put into place by the federal government having to do with travel to hotspot countries, if you remember that. So it's generally the same concept. And again, the criteria is that if you go to one of these hotspot states, and it says this in writing that we issued today, and when you come back to New York, you're going to be required by New York State to self-quarantine for 14 calendar days. And if you were directed to go and travel out of state by your employer, BOCES, as part of your job, then you would still be eligible for paid sick time from the BOCES, from your employer. We're not going to do that. We haven't done it, and we will not do that. So, but you may, I know we've had people in this situation, if you have illness in your family, your mom or your pops are sick, you have to travel out of state, you have to drop your kids off. There may be very compelling reasons why you have to go to someplace. But just be aware of the fact that if you go, when you come back, you need to quarantine at home for 14 days. That's all. We wanted to, and that will go through whenever that executive order expires. Whether it will be renewed or not, I can't speak for the governor. I assume it will if there's high hotspots in the state. We just wanted to make sure that all staff were aware of those considerations before they make a decision to travel to one of those states. Holly, I can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
I gotta unmute myself, sorry.
Okay.
So that looks like most of the questions were, if your kid or a kid in your class is positive, I guess we're following New York State guidelines on that.
Yeah, well, if they're positive, we won't know that until, they'll presumably be symptomatic. But, I have to tell you, from what I've read, anywhere from 40 to 50% of kids who have COVID-19 are asymptomatic. I'm sure you've read that.
Yes.
And that's why we have to protect ourselves. It couldn't make a better case to protect ourselves. But to answer your question, we won't find out if a child is positive in school. They're going to be sick and they'll display symptoms, and the parent will be called. They'll be asked to go to the doctor, have the proper testing done, and be cleared. Be cleared before you can come back to school. If you are positive, you'll have to wait through the quarantine period before you can be readmitted to school, as would be the case with a staff member. And by the way, it will be, the 14 days has been pretty consistent, because that's the number of days that the medical field has said the outer limits of when you could be contagious. Because there's we deal with this all the time. There's a period of when you're contagious and not contagious. And there's always a period before you display the symptoms that you're contagious, but you don't know it because you're asymptomatic. But those specifics, that will be guided by the decisions that the New York State Department of Health makes. I'm going to guess and say that because they've had 14 days from the beginning, that period of quarantine will stay and remain with us through the school year. But the individual specific decisions, it's made by doctors. When they test individuals, they're required to report this to the health department. They're required to do it. So if they test positive, they're required to do it. So it's not only incumbent upon us to report it, when the doctor who's reading the test sees that these are positive results, they're required to make that report immediately to the health department. And I guarantee you they do that.
All right, and then in regards to training of staff and students in proper hand washing, glove and deglove, mask protocol, how are you thinking about managing that?
Well, we have one of the 10 subcommittees as part of our reopening school committee is a professional development committee. And one of the trainings that we're actually required to provide, not because it makes good sense, which it does, but we're required to teach staff about how to remove their face mask. It might be a simple thing, but you have your face mask, and I have it on, and a lot of people may go like this, just pull it off, and that's the last thing you're supposed to do, because you're touching the infected area. So our thinking on this is to do this remotely on the computer, and the problem is that it's tough to bring in 200 people into a room, into a gym, and do social distancing. It doesn't work. So in looking through how we're going to do a lot of this PD, we're going to look to do it on the computer and allow, one of the things that we put into place with this year's calendar is we have 2 days before the start for Superintendent's Conference Day, and we didn't adopt that calendar thinking to use it for this purpose, but having nothing to do with COVID-19, there's so much training that has to happen. It's staff weren't having the time to set the class up. So, get it all done in a day. So that's why we built into the calendar a second Superintendent's Conference Day without extending the school year, by the way. So, Holly, to answer your question, yes, there are a series of areas that we're required to provide training. There are other areas that are not required to provide it, but we want to do that. How to recognize staff that may have mental health issues, anxiety issues, how to recognize students, try and get people help. Not mandated, but makes sense to us to do that. And all those items are in that template for the subcommittee. I know it because I put them in there with input from other administrators. So they're there waiting for action, but I'm waiting to see what other kind of professional development I'm required to provide in this state document. And when I get off this meeting, I'll go on the computer and see if it's here yet.
Oh, it did come, Mike. They posted it a little while ago. So the other question is, in terms of making sure, at elementary and junior, senior, and Brennan, they do have a lot of mental health staff, but on our CTE campuses, that is a lack. And I know that is something that we're trying to build up a little bit. You mentioned that is going to be included, that we're going to try and bulk that up a little bit.
No, I don't want to misstate that. You're right. When you talk about special ed, virtually every school has some part-time consultant psychiatrist, medical doctor, who's assigned to the building maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And school districts don't have that capacity at all. If you we had the Parkland shootings a couple of years ago, there were about 6 students that came in the next day and were imitating, threats of that nature. And so there were 6 students, and the 6 students were evaluated that day by our consultant psychiatrist in school. Now that ability does not exist in a school district. And 4 of those students were taken to Stony Brook Hospital as a result of that initial evaluation for further evaluation, and 3 were admitted. So, but that's the nature of special ed. Brennan Middle and High School, not this past year, the year before, they had 63 hospitalizations within the school year, which, that's why those children are in that building. So those programs do have ready access to mental health services. If the psychiatrist, not that they provide those services, but they refer these students out. What we wanted to do in terms of the training, Holly, was to provide training by the way, by Dr. Westbrot, who's one of our consultant psychiatrists, to our administrative staff and even to support staff on how do you recognize people who might be suffering from some type of issue related to being out of work for 5 or 6 months. And we don't have anything readily available in CTE, to be truthful with you, that addresses that after we provide the training. So, the first step is train people on how to recognize it. What happens in CTE when you have students who require that evaluation, and it has happened in the past, is that we reach out to the family. If there's a treating psychiatrist, we reach out to the psychiatrist. If there isn't, we require that the family bring their child to CPEC at Stony Brook, have them evaluated and provide a clearance medical NUC before they come back. That's how it's worked in CTE. And I'm aware of that because I've been involved in exactly those situations. You know, we had, you know, one kid posted something having to do with weapons on a website. And, you know, we can't interpret what they mean or don't mean by that. And we said to the parents, your child's not coming back to school until they're evaluated. So go to Stony Brook, get them evaluated. And the kid was, you know, cleared to come back. But that's the process. If there's a need, because we're finding out that there's a lot of situations in CTE that require a more intensive level of intervention, we certainly want to know about that and react to that. And we would do that in that situation, Holly.
We did have Sarah Post, who was just lovely, and we utilized her a lot as a social worker at Dix Hills. I just found out today that she will not be coming back, which then kind of leaves the gap, especially for kids who got used to consulting her if things weren't going well. But I guess that's something we'll take at another time. I was just looking at the rest of this. Devin popped back in. Welcome back, Devin. I don't know if there was, that's all right. Did anybody see anything else that I didn't pick up on this chat? Because it's a lot.
So when you get kicked off and rejoin, your whole chat is gone. So that's something that I'm learning now on this Zoom meeting. I see a few things coming up now. For if we do go to remote learning, or there is a distance, you know, period of time, has the agency considered the tech for staff, for people who were, you know, sharing computers with their children, or just didn't have, you know, whatever they needed at home to provide those services?
Well, yeah, we're discussing it. I mean, we did go out and order some Chromebooks. And I addressed that earlier about equity for students. First and foremost, to make sure that students have Chromebooks. To do that, we hired a consultant back in first week in May to help facilitate that process, and is still employed by us. The process meaning of trying to support teachers who are engaged in remote learning when they never have done that before in their career. And I don't mean to say this in a disparaging way. Don't interpret it that way, but a part of that listening forum that the Regents hosted, they hosted a forum just for students. And, you know, the most commonly cited issue by students was that we love our teachers. They have hearts of gold, but they don't know how to teach technologically. They don't know how to do it. But, you know, it was a real takeaway. You know, that's kids are. And we've been working this summer to see if we can provide some PD to special ed and CTE teachers. We're working to see if we can do it. We have a regional summer program that does not operate under special ed or CTE. It operates under our DIS division. It provides summer services to students who don't attend BOCES schools, but rather attend district schools. We're the only BOCES on Long Island that ran that program this summer. I compliment Angelique Johnson-Dingle, who runs that division. She and her staff did a lot of lifting. You know, who wants to voluntarily offer remote services? No one. And we did. And we took kids in from other BOCES. We started a program that we've never offered before. It was an enrichment program for kids in elementary grades and school districts who had demonstrated significant regression. And we provided that. So those teachers who are running those programs, you know, that's the people who work in that program, that they're at-will employees, But for you to apply to a program knowing you're teaching virtually, almost all those teachers are really comfortable teaching virtually. And they have a background in technology, and we've kind of discovered that. And we're looking to see how we can tap into that over the course of this summer to use their expertise. You know, there's many levels to Google. And, you know, you might be operating at level 1 or level 1.5, and there may be 10 other levels below that or above it. These teachers are more, you know, comfortable in using maximum opportunity to tap into the technology for that that particular pathway. So we are looking at that. We're not sure what we can do this summer, but we'd like to capture some PD if we could this summer using those folks.
Mhm. Okay. Okay, I think we're getting towards the end. I do have a few more if you don't mind. There was a question about itinerant teachers and if different districts are on different schedules or hybrids or closures, is there going to be some sort of contingency plan for itinerant teachers?
Yeah, I'm sure there will be.
Right.
And, you know, we'll add it to the list when we come there. You know, we have no way of
Right.
having that discussion because districts are still talking about what their hybrid schedule looks like. But you know, it's always, you know, it's always an issue because you have, you know, so many variables there, but we always figure it out, you know, and we'll figure it out. That won't be a problem.
And I think a lot of these, you know, what if scenario questions are going to just present themselves as the next 6 weeks continue to unfold, you know, and they'll be dealt with in that time. Someone else has asked for, again, for other districts, you know, we have a lot of moms and families in our agency. Will children who have, like, staff members who have children that have hybrid schedules, will there be any accommodations made for childcare in those cases?
You know, the answer is no. But I have thought about it. You know, Scope is a non-for-profit agency that it's been operating for many years. Our BOCES has a relationship with Scope, but they provide childcare in school districts. So I'm almost certain Deer Park has one. So they'll pick a building in Deer Park and they'll say, we're going to run a before school or after school or during school a childcare program. And then typically it's only open to those staff who work in that district. That's how it's worked. But, you know, we actually had a daycare program, if you remember, you know, and there wasn't an interest. That's why we did away with it, quite frankly. Now, I know these are different times and different scenarios, but there's a lot of liability when you take children into a daycare. Those programs are licensed by the state. And it's not something you say, we're going to do that next week. There's a lot of protocols and steps involved with doing that and getting the proper staff. The advantage that Scope has is that they have all those protocols in place. If the union wanted to gather information from your membership about what that would look like, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. What would be really important is that these would have to be people making a commitment, because, you know, I couldn't approach Scope and say, we got 17 staff who want to send their child here 5 days a week, whatever it is. And then they do all this lifting, they hire people, you know, we make space available, whatever. And then it turns out we got 3 people who sign up for the program. You know, it can't happen. You know, if there's a need, certainly look to help people out, understand that situation. But we, you know, Scope would have to be willing to do it. We'd have to have space that would be available to do it, which is, you know, a huge problem right now in terms of space in our buildings. But there's nothing wrong with a conversation.
Thank you. Okay.
Devin,
Yes.
Devin, look at your list of questions and pick one more.
Okay.
No,
I'm gonna kind of do a general question that's gonna mold a lot of the remaining ones together. A lot of questions are coming up regarding, you mentioned cohorts before, possible push-ins. I guess the overall question is, no matter what way you do it, there could be increased exposure. If, you know, if people push into classrooms rather than, from a related service perspective, if people push into classrooms rather than pull a kid out, they are exposing themselves to more people. On the flip side, people are saying, you know, with the cohorts, would there be a benefit to having related services only work with a limited amount of classrooms to try to minimize that exposure? So I guess the larger question would be, you know, is there thought being given to how the setup is going to be as far as related service provider to classrooms?
Well, I'm sure there's one of the committees has this issue on it to discuss, and different challenges, different circumstances, obviously in play. You know, without you know, would we have to sit down and have the conversation? Of course we have to. You know, it's a conversation that you're not going to have with me, quite frankly. It's a conversation to be had at the building level with the principal, but following a protocol that we agree to, some guidance there. But without reacting, it just makes sense to me that the more you limit your contact with classes, the better everyone is. So you said, does it make sense to limit your contact to whatever it is, 3 classes, 4 classes, instead of 12 classes? You know, without knowing the specifics, that generally makes perfectly good sense to me. It's in the interest of the staff and the student. It protects everyone involved. And I think that's the kind of conversation that we have to have, quite frankly. And, you know, you can't even have that conversation. Again, we want to send our survey out to our parents about what their thoughts are about September. And again, we want to frame that according to the guidance document. You know, what is it that we're permitted to do, not permitted to do? Don't want to frustrate people and, ask questions that turn out not to be viable questions and then have people get frustrated. So if we have the document here, that would be helpful. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of building level decisions like this, and probably 100 other scenarios that we have to work through together. And people have been great. People have been flexible. You're going to have to be flexible. We have to make this work. We have to get through this together, and we will.
Yeah.
But while we get through it together, we want to keep ourselves safe. I don't want anyone getting sick. And we have to do our best to try and minimize that. And we will. We'll work together in that regard. But it's gonna be challenging. And you read the paper. I don't know when it was. I think it was yesterday, where the infection rate went up, which they attribute to people on the beaches wearing unprotected, not wearing a protection for a face mask. So people can't do that. They don't have a right to make other people sick. They got it. They're adults. They're responsible. I don't get it, but for the little slice of the world we control, we're going to make it as safe for our staff and students as we possibly can.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming and answering these questions. I think I heard Holly mention it while we were here. That did come out. The guide, and my husband printed it out for me, 145 pages, so I have it here.
Okay. Well, it's not 150, so that's good.
No,
Maybe
it's
5 pages less.
145. Yeah, 145.
Might help us. Okay, so Devin and Holly, thank you for again inviting me. I always enjoy these chats. I think, you know, the more we communicate and share information, the better. And it puts you in a position to try and help us understand these issues and solve some of these issues. So I've offered this to the other units. No one has taken me up on it. I told me I have great conversations with the teachers, but I do thank you for inviting me to these conversations. They're very helpful for me, and I'm sure for the group, and we'll keep each other informed. Obviously, a logical time to do it again might be after we submit our plan, and then we'll have a sense of what we're asking or what our plan looks like. But you know, barring something unforeseen, you know, I tried to lay out the framework of what that will look like in special ed and CTE, because, you know, we've discussed this. How do we make this work? And everyone's been very cooperative and supportive. So we'll continue these discussions going forward. Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the coming weekend and be safe.
Thank you. You as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure if Ernie, I'm sure he's still here. I don't know if Ernie, you want to wrap it up? If you want me to wrap it up?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks everyone for being here to listen to Mr. Flynn as to where we are and where we're heading. And I'll leave it up to Devin or Ms. Soma to decide where we go from here. I am just here willing to listen and or answer questions that members may have in all divisions. 9, 10.
Share something on the screen. If Devin, you want to wrap up, I'm just going to share my screen for just some further information for everyone. And again, this is on YouTube. Thank you, everyone on YouTube who joined. We were able to see your live stream questions, and we integrated them into the chat. So that worked out nicely.
Just that one last note, and Megan, I'm going to have to talk with Jen about this, but my thought is for gauging interest in any kind of program, maybe we could work something out to put a survey on the website, which would then have me remind everyone to continue checking the website, and I will turn it over to Jen.
Absolutely, that sounds great. And I hope you guys can see my screen. This meeting, it will be available on our YouTube channel as well as our website. And I think that's the next practical step, is that we create something that we can put on the website. So be sure to check it out. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So Devin, it's up to you if you wanted to call it to a close or.
Oh, I thought we did. I'm sorry. I thought Jen did kind of call it to a close. A lot of people are leaving. I think we are closed.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for who's still here.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Okay, I'm going to kick everybody out now.
Yep. Okay. Bye.